All right, everybody, I think it's time to start. So glad you're here with us tonight. My name's Liberty, and I'm part of the Firestorm Collective. Tonight, we're excited to host Rattling the Cages co-creator Eric King in conversation with family members of former political prisoners for a discussion about the familial harm of prisons and the unswerving love and solidarity that keeps hope alive for folks inside. In case this is your first Rattling the Cages event, I will say Firestorm is a 16-year-old radical bookstore owned and operated by a queer feminist collective in Southern Appalachia on the land of the Cherokee, and I'm a member of the team here at Firestorm. We've got several other upcoming virtual events, including a conversation actually tomorrow on the West Virginia mine wars that should be really cool. So definitely follow us on social media or bookmark our calendar or just relentlessly call our phone number and ask what's going on, whatever works for you. So tonight, this fantastic conversation is going to be happening on Zoom, which is a frustrating but somewhat useful piece of technology. There is a Q&A tool and an open chat, and I just want to encourage people to use both. If you don't mind putting questions for the panel into the Q&A tool, then that'll help us keep track of them a little better than if they're in the chat. But please feel free to use both. Depending on if you're on your phone or a computer, there's probably icons at either the top or bottom of your screen to find those. All right, so we're going to get started. Do a few quick introductions here. First up, we've got Sharon Shoatz, who's the daughter of Russell Maroon Shoatz and a retired New York City public school educator, active member within the Panther Cubs, and an advocate for the release and freedom of all political prisoners. Just so you know, you can learn more about Russell in the books Maroon, the Implacable, the collected writings of Russell Maroon Shoatz, and I Am Maroon, the true story of an American political prisoner. Sharon, so glad you're here, and so glad you're here in the I Am Maroon shirt.
That's Susie. Hey,
yes. Wow, okay, awesome. Everybody's got their book handy. Incredible. Next up, Susie Day is a journalist who showed up at a Washington, D.C. jail in 1988 to interview 4 of the defendants in the resistance conspiracy case, charged with a string of anti-imperialist bombings. Susie ended up falling in love with the most nefarious of the lot, Laura Whitehorn, who I will mention we actually had for a previous Rattling the Cages event, which was a fantastic conversation specifically on women's prisons. That was back in November. I just want to encourage everybody to go back and watch that conversation if you didn't catch it live. So Susie and Laura now live together in New York City, where Laura works with release aging people in prison, and Susie covers prisons, policing, and political activism. Also sometimes writes satire. Susie's the author of The Brother You Choose. Paul Coates and Eddie Conway talk about life, politics, and the revolution. And we are so pleased to have you here tonight, Susie.
Thank you.
Next up, we've got Rochelle Bricker, who's a longtime community and labor organizer focusing on unions and class solidarity. Rochelle has an extensive history in prisoner support and in supporting the family members and partners of those incarcerated. She started and maintained the Eric King support team through Eric's entire incarceration. And Rochelle is a multi-form artist and parent of 2, as well as the lifelong partner of former political prisoner Eric King. Welcome, Rochelle.
Thank you.
And speaking of which, we've also got Eric King here to facilitate tonight. Eric is a father, poet, author, and activist. In December 2023, he was released from the Supermax ADX prison after spending nearly 10 years as a political prisoner for an act of protest over the police murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. He was held in solitary confinement for years and was met with violence by guards throughout his incarceration. Eric has published 3 zines, Battle Tested, Antifa in Prison, and Pacing in My Cell. His sentencing statement is included in the book Defiance, Anarchist Statements Before Judge and Jury, which is an incredible book everybody should pick up. and Eric now works as a paralegal for the Bread and Roses Legal Center. Thanks so much for being here, Eric, and for making all this possible.
No one clap for me. Oh, there it goes.
All right, passing it off to you to take us away. I'm really looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Awesome, Liberty. Thank you so much. So for those who are listening and will be listening in the future, I want to point out that this conversation was desperately needed because the voices of loved ones are often left behind, are often left unheard. And their experiences sometimes are not given as much weight as the prisoner themselves. And so this was like incredibly important. So thank all of you for agreeing to do this and talking with me. I want to start, this isn't something that we prepared for per se, but it just popped in my head. I want to start with, if you can remember your first experience going into the prison to see your loved one. The first time that you were in there or realized like what was happening or how serious it was or how shitty it was, just what you felt that first time you went inside. And we can go in order, Susie, if you want to start this time.
Okay, let me just start by saying I'm different than Rochelle or Sharon because you both were family members of somebody that you had already known in prison, right? Oh no, you met at
Rochelle and I married
right.
inside.
Oh my God. Okay, that's interesting. I just assumed
3 months into his
Okay.
after his arrest, and so like before everything kicked off. So no.
So you hadn't met each other before
No.
you went to prison? That's okay. I guess I just assumed the whole married thing meant that it was for a long time. Okay, great.
It was still 10 years, but it was 10 years like
Uh-huh.
where we both knew what we were getting in. Well, I mean, sort of, he was still pre-trial, but we both knew
Uh-huh.
what that was going to be. But that was early on in our relationship, like making those choices and commitments.
Yeah, okay. So then we do have a lot more in common than I thought. Yeah, because the first time I met Laura, I was going into the DC jail to interview the 4 women in Laura's Capitol bombing case, Susan Rosenberg, Marilyn Buck, Linda Evans, and then Laura. And I guess I always knew it was serious because before that had happened, I'd been following Susan Rosenberg's arrest, and she, with 2 other political women, were kept in the sensory deprivation unit in Lexington, Kentucky. And so I was somewhat familiar with that campaign to get them out. I mean, so I kind of knew of the case through Susan, and then I went in to interview each of the 4 women for this story for Sojourner magazine. And yeah, I think later that I wrote an essay about this a long time ago, but later that day on the train home to New York from DC, I just realized I had a massive crush on Laura, you know, and then there were so many serious things in the way at that point because they were at that point facing like another 78 years in prison. Laura was the only one who didn't already have a huge sentence, and they wouldn't let her out on bail. But Susan Rosenberg already had 58 years. Linda Evans had, I can't remember, maybe 40 to 60. Marilyn Buck, of course. Anyway, so I knew it was quite serious. And then falling in love with somebody so that you have this heart connection with somebody in that kind of trouble was kind of changed my life forever in a way. And also knowing Laura, because if you don't know both of us, I will say that we're kind of opposites in almost any way, politically, especially. And so we started out our relationship arguing, and we still do. So anyway, I don't know if that's enough of an answer, but
Yeah, that's perfect.
yeah.
That's perfect.
Okay.
All right, Sharon, would you like going?
I guess for me, I guess I would say, it was early on because, of course, my father was incarcerated by 72. I think I was about 7 years old. So I was visiting him very early in my life. And then I think when I knew it was really serious is when he escaped. And he was all over the television and the newspapers and, it was like cop killer. So I was very clear then, if I wasn't clear before then,
That gave you an identity. That's
yeah, that it
crazy.
was something serious. So I guess that was probably the first time I actually really knew. Um, and then, of course, after that, it was the challenges of visiting him because of those escapes, and the of course torture he took on after the escapes, the beatings, and then to being isolated from general population. And so, very early on I knew um growing
Mhm.
up. Yeah.
All right, Cabbage, do you want to go in?
Yeah. Um, Thank you for sharing that. That really fascinates me in that because it's just suddenly you have an identity to the whole world. Like they didn't know you before, and now everybody who meets you like has some concept of that, and that's got to be like a really radical change at the age of 7. Like us versus them. Our first visit was a few months into Eric's sentence. I started writing him as like I've written people supporting prisoners before, so it wasn't anything different. However, like opening his first letter, it was different. And so like the first time we talked on the phone, it was different. And to go visit him, I drove 8 hours down to Leavenworth, CCA Leavenworth, and you have to go in this like little trailer in the back of the unit because he was in SHU at the time. He was in SHU when I first met him, and then pretty consistently throughout. So a lot of the time our visits were through screens, and so we're sitting there and there's this like guard sitting there, and I believe it wasn't just me, it was a friend of mine who was also supporting him, but like it was embarrassing because there there was like a very obvious connection that like we didn't really understand necessarily before until midway through that. And so I feel like that whole visit was just a pretty chaotic blur. He was facing 2 counts of 30 years each at the time. I think that was a plea deal they were offering, was 2 counts of 30 years each. But like it moved down throughout. But when we first met, like there was no guarantee of the 10, so it was walking into the unknown.
Thank you, Annie. Um, so I wanna stick on visits because while your loved one's inside, that's that's often the only contact you have. Um, so I will I'll start with you this time, Sharon. If we could talk about what visits were like. Were you able to play games? Were the guards respectful or disrespectful? Was there other inmates around? Um, what sort of connections you were able to maintain and develop through visits? So it's kind of like it's a big question, but like I'm interested and want people to know like what that connection was really like with a loved one inside. So Sharon, if you'd fire us off.
Yeah, well, again, and I just want to clarify, he was locked up when I was 7, but of course, over time, a lot of years, decades, he's been incarcerated because I'm now getting ready to turn 60. And so, the visit started from something simple as, you know, going to Graterford and, you know, picnics outside because I was a young kid then, you know. Like I said, after he escaped when I was like in, I think, sixth grade, um, it got more draconian, so to speak, with the visits. Of course, he was more segregated, you know. And then after the second escape, of course, you know, they were definitely more draconian to the point where I think it was either Dallas or Huntington that my brother and I had to walk through the entire prison, right? It wasn't even in a visiting room. So it was where they had the hole, so to speak, what they called it at that time. And you know, it was crazy because it was cat calls and,
Oh,
you know, people whistling, and, you know, the barbershop was on this side, and it was all the daily activities that took place, you know, during the course of the day in the institution. And I'm walking through this entire course never seeing it before because, you know, usually all you see is the visiting room. And so when we get back there, it's a room, you know, with a square room with like cells on the outside of it for all the people that were in the hole. And the room was a clear box, and my father was at a table, handcuffed to the table. And so, yes, I've seen various things from, you know, dogs sniffing our cars to not having on the right clothes and having clothes in our trunk to make sure, to, you know, making sure everybody had a driver's license in case one of us didn't get in. You can't sit on the property. You know, all the things and barriers that are put up for you not to see your loved ones, you know. So it's like the family is also being punished in this whole process. Um,
were
I've
you
been,
able to ever have physical visits after the escapes? Was he always in that sort of situation, or did you get those back?
well, no, once he went to Green, yeah, that was 22 years there. But prior to that, the Huntington, or it was Dallas or Huntington, I can't remember, was the same type of, he was in the hole, you know, type of visit,
Yeah.
you know, and he was just not in general population, and they were not going to let any visits take place in general population. And so once he got to Green, it was even more restrictive with, you know, the glass. He handcuffed, you know, the entire time behind a glass with a phone handcuffed. And, you know, we're on the other side with little holes on the side for us to communicate through. And it was a little box, barely two chairs, three chairs could fit in for, and again, not a part of the general process. So yeah, it's been a lot of visits that, you know, were mostly designed for no contact, you know, and to be on the other side of a window and still to be handcuffed the entire visit. And then the visits were like 1 hour for for Green during a weekday. You know, so all of those barriers that you put up for families is already in a rural area, transportation, the costs, all the financial stuff that comes with that. So I hope I'm not going on and on. You can, you
No,
know,
this is what I want people to understand, how big of a burden they make these visits to try to rip families apart. So thank you.
yeah.
Um, Cabbage, would you go next, and we'll end with Susie on this one?
Yeah, will you ask the question one more time so I can refresh?
So we're trying to figure out what visits were actually like. Were you able to connect? Were you able to play games? Did you have confrontations or bad problems with guards? Just like what the visiting experience overall was like for you.
Yeah, I think you only have, no matter like what the type of visit, because we visited a bunch of different types away, and you only have whatever connection you can make after you pass the different levels of problems. And different prisons will have like different things. Like some prisons, maybe the guards at the front are decent, or it's a good rotation, or maybe you don't have to drive very far, or maybe you can get there on your own. You have a car and you have gas and you have people to go with you. But maybe it's not that. Maybe they are gonna fuck with you. Maybe it's terrible, terrible things. And you have to know, like, in that time, especially if you're a trauma survivor, like, and most of us are by that point, because of like what we've engaged in. And so you have to like find a way to like maintain access to yourself while fighting these people, sparring them. It's always a mind game. Going in, waiting in line, it's always a mind game. And so once we would get past that, like, yeah, like, but if we had an hour and I had to drive 8 hours to Kansas and I was in a thing, um, I mean, honestly, at that point, it was just bliss because we didn't have very much time where we got to like see each other's faces. But like as he got in and gotten like the BOP, and the war started between like them and us, because when he landed, like our first war started because his counselor, like they're supposed to have visits within 24 hours. If you're married, like you can have one visit like in the first week, or your family. And we were, and we emailed the stuff for the counselor, and then the counselor took it upon herself to like Google me as the first line of stuff. And so she told him that like I would not be having a visit, that like I had violated like something, I don't remember what it was, but like that I was not it. It turns out she had found an article about me because there were some Ferguson protests going on, and some people, while I was bailing them out, I was breastfeeding my daughter, and a police officer had told me to stop breastfeeding. Like, you can't do that here. And it like blew up into a big thing. And they had seen those articles and they downloaded them, and we found them later in discovery. They had used those to try to like threaten our visits a few different times, and they showed up at like in discovery photos. Like they had been passing photos of me nursing my daughter that they had downloaded from the internet, that they had downloaded from like right-wing blogs, that they had downloaded. And that was like the start of like their little security file. And like we were always like I mean, it was a lot through the years, and that was what they would use to try to separate us. And that's kind of why the attacks came too, because like we were happy. We were so happy. Like we first got to sit next to each other in Inglewood, we were holding hands, and our love through our hands were so offensive to them. They had to tell us, no, you guys actually can't hold hands. But then we wouldn't be touching each other, but like sending energy to each other, like being near and stuff. Like, and it was just always a new level of offense. They would trash whatever games that like we got into that we would play. They would play little games like trying to sit the kids in like the pedophile section with us, like for visits, just like whatever power things they could do. But if we could fight past that and we could keep our wall down, or like lower our wall enough to like let each other through, and like we were always above that. Like I would shut down, like sometimes I would get triggered. It would be, he'd have to come with like lists of topics prepared on his hand in case like I was like emotionally just out of it. And so like, but it was just all finding new ways to connect, and like the channels they block off, and just like popping up and finding another one.
Susie, do you need me to repeat the question? You got it.
Oh boy, I guess I do. It's just so, I mean, there's like whole novels that everybody, all of us could write here, and we're just like skimming the surface. I'm just wait when you're talking Rochelle or Cabbage. I I I don't know what to call you. Anyway, I'm struck with the difference between the kind of zeitgeist you guys went through and what uh, Laura and I were in, because this was like the late 80s through the 90s until she got out in 1999, where the interweb was basically not around, just barely. And so there weren't a whole lot of right-wing blogs and all that stuff. And so part of my role in visiting Laura was quite often, especially in the DC jail before they got sentenced and dispersed to other prisons, um, to interview Laura, and I went back and interviewed Alan Berkman and Tim Blunk. Um, oh yes. So my role then was to partly be part of a team which included lawyers and other journalists to kind of keep some kind of public awareness of these people without an internet, and basically keep their case somehow in the public eye, or at least in the countercultural eye, so that they could get some support, because that was a kind of survival. So I was helping to create sort of a public presence for Laura and Alan and Tim and Marilyn and Susan and Linda, you know. And in doing that, I feel like it's probably really different than what you guys went through, because I guess there was a different level of public perception. And I think in Maroon's case, you know, I think he is of that vintage too, where you wanted to you needed stories out about your dad, you know, to keep him in the public eye so he gets some protection from, you know, as little as that can be, it's something, you know, a little publicity, some petitions, some picketing, whatever,
Something.
that helped. Huh?
I said something, anything.
Yeah, it helps keep them alive. And so anyway, doing that, I think in some ways complicated my relationship with Laura, you know, because in some ways I was kind of a press agent. And at the same time, we were also, you know, just arguing as we usually do about revolution and politics and stuff like that. And then, as a just normal human being, I would occasionally visit her in a non-professional capacity. Um, and yeah, the Pat searches. I mean, the DC jail was Pat City. I mean, it was just I basically got busted for trying to take in Chinese food occasionally, and I did get some egg rolls through one time. But yeah, to everything that Sharon is saying, it's just yeah, you're terrified about getting kicked out when you're so desperate to talk to this person, and you want to be on your best behavior, but you're under so much stress. And so are they, you know, because the visit can be interrupted at any time for any reason. And you desperately want to like spend some time and make a connection. And it's the only chance you have to bring your realities together, inside prison and the life outside. And it's an impossible situation, but all you could do is try, you know. And I think we've all tried, you know, and it's really frustrating, but and heartbreaking, but necessary.
So thank all three of you for answering that question. Some of these aren't easy questions. Like there's a lot of hurt built up in this for what they did to your loved ones and to you. So I just have so much love and respect for all three of you for sharing this with us. This time I'm going to start with you, Rochelle. And I want to know what perhaps your best moment was with your loved one inside. So Susie, Sharon as well, but what moment like really just filled you with joy or hope or just happiness where you could let loose?
I would say there was like different kinds of freedoms and like different kinds of moments and different kinds of stuff. And like, because when Eric was pre-trial, it was like the great anti-fascist awakening when like it was happening. Like anti-fascists came out of the closet, or like Trump was getting elected, and he started talking a lot about anti-fascists. And so when he got to Inglewood, it was after the presidency had already started, and like they had already decided like what we were was the enemy, and that like they were gonna uncover like whatever it was and send him to ADX or CMU. Like they had already decided that. They had started, like we could see the paper trail down the road in Discovery, but like they had started that process. And so our time was very combative, like every prison, like every way, like, and then for 4 years of it, maybe he was pretrial for the second case, and it was a case against the BOP. And so like it was, we all we had was combat. So like my best times was when we'd be fighting them and winning during the visit for whatever it was. Like there was somebody pissing me off, and like I got that person in trouble in some way, like a backhanded way, like front-handed way, like if we got in their heads, if we like when we were like united against them, because there was always a swing. So like we could either just be battered all the time, or like we could strategize together. We could find out like how to protect ourselves against them. And like I think that was really unifying. um I think ADX though was probably our most healing time, because like it was the first time where they couldn't do anything worse to us. So like there was a limit. And they had to be nice to us, because like when he got to ADX, they weren't pretending, like each prison would kind of pretend they didn't do the things that they did to us, and like it would be this pretense and stuff. But when they got there, like it wasn't pretense like anymore. Like they all would acknowledge what had been done to us previously. And so there were times where people beefed on the way in, but for the most part, like I would drive out there. It was like little stalls too. It was like a stark white room, and there were maybe like 8 stalls, and you can have a couple chairs, and you get in your little thing, and we have a great time in like shoe visiting, like because it's just us, like it's just us in our little stall, or it's just us in our little room. um there's glass in between, but like that was when visits started getting like just a lot better, because like they weren't like with the cops standing over you, like they are a part of your whole visit, like they are a part of like the energy is like intruding in it. And at least at ADX, like it was high tech, that like we knew that like everything we were being recorded would go to CTU, would go to the counterterrorism unit. We knew there was a record of all of it, like for the first time. And so like when things were coming in, like they just couldn't hurt us as royally anymore. And so we were able to like talk about like the 3 years without phone and what happened, and talk about like the year without visits or phone, like during COVID, and like what happened to both of us. And just like because we didn't have phone for quite a bit. And so like those were definitely like I'd say our best visits.
Thank you, Bubba. I would have said family day at
Well,
Florida.
yeah, but that's like one day. We only got one of those, and then they took it away by like attacking you like a few months afterwards. So I have feelings about Family Day.
So Sharon,
Yeah, so I would say probably my happiest was seeing him get out of solitary. My brother and I were the first to visit him that first evening he was able to get a visit at Graterford. They have night visits. And it was happy. I was taken back a little bit by the fact that when I hugged him, it felt not as I dreamt it, not as I imagined it, not the sparks and sensations. You know how you have these realities in your head of what that feels like and what that looks like. And that feeling was empty. And I don't know if it was because he had not touched anybody for 22 years or whether I had this grandeur in my head that was loftier than expectations. But I think it was a combination of both, that no touch 22 years, and to hug somebody and not feel, what you believe you should feel because of, the fact that he hasn't touched anyone in 22 years. He couldn't even go down the steps because he hadn't walked down steps in 22 years. So, that was happy and it was a, bittersweet pill as well, but it was one of the happiest times for me. I think, and secondly, for me was the fact that once he was out, I was able to come to Greater for there was a program being sponsored by one of the juvenile lifers there, Luis Suave Gonzalez. He's an artist, award-winning podcaster, and he's now out. But he had a program there, and my dad was like, he's gonna let you come, you and Russ get here, and we're going to be able to break bread together. And I was like, wow, because I really hadn't thought about it. You're so busy trying to free your loved ones, you don't even think about the little things you've missed, like sitting down at a table eating with your father. I'm like, wow, I didn't even and then when we were there, it was so powerful in the sense that my dad's a character, of course, when it comes to fried chicken. And they were stacking up the fried chicken next to him, and he was just taking it, and and that was the first time I had even saw that side of him, outside of sitting in the, visiting rooms. So yeah, I think the happiest moment was, those two moments for me, and particularly sitting down and being able to break bread at a table with my father for the first time ever. So yeah, that was it.
So much for sharing. Susie, best moments and visits.
Oh, yeah. Well, speaking of breaking bread, there were, of course, the vending machines. You can always make jokes about, oh, all that money for such crap.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, and then you had to be sure and pick out just the right thing if it was possible to find, the little chicken patty with, anyway. But yeah, happy times. That was really hard. I can't help but look at the chat where Laura is saying it's so important to remember that none of our communications were private.
Right.
Yeah, that had a lot to do with it. I mean, when we would talk on the phone, which was sporadic, we would get into these discussions and then some occasional misunderstandings, even arguments. And at some point, I always felt like asking the FBI guy on the line to roll back the conversation so we could hear what I actually really did say, you know. So I feel like we might as well use this surveillance state, to help iron out relationships. But happiness, I don't think, I mean, that was just the joy of loving somebody even though the circumstances were so dire and scary. But actual good times probably occurred in Dublin after Laura finally had a release date. So this would be like the late 90s. And I would visit her, and this is California, where the weather is usually pretty nice. And we would sit in this kind of patio, kind of. It was outdoors. I mean, they yanked out a huge, great willow tree, which was a tragedy, but because they wanted to keep it serious. But it was still pretty nice, and there were flowers. And that was one time where we would take our chairs and go down and sit by the flower bed and not be monitored, actually. And so we had some really nice times. Yeah. I also actually, we were able to cross visit a little bit with Delcio Pagan and Carmen Valentin, the Puerto Rican independentistas, and the Rodriguez sisters. So it was a political hotbed a little bit, but basically I think that's where Laura and I did more and better connecting than in any other prison,
Thank you
you
so
know.
much.
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with you for this next question because you had to go last the last two times. Um, so each of you, this is going to be like different for each of you. Because the relationships reach different. So I want to know, you went into your relationship as a lawyer to start with, or a journalist, I mean, to like
Mhm.
talk about them. Um, did you face any blowback or stigma or harshness when your relationship transitioned into something romantic? Like, did you face
Yes.
any of that?
Yeah, and I wasn't really that much worried about getting blowback from the prison. I mean, we were, constant enemies. Anyway, what happened
I
was
meant
I
from the
think I
community.
of the community, yeah, I lost some friends, I think. I think they were happy to read about the case and learn more about it, but when I became emotionally involved, I feel like and it looked, again, this was a different time. The word codependent was in the air, and doing something like falling in love with somebody in prison is the textbook example of what not to do. Is like, oh, they're in trouble. I love them. My life doesn't matter. So I feel like I, as well as other people, were thinking, oh, no, 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 this is a bad idea. Step away. And I got a lot of that pressure, some of which came from myself. But I don't think it was stigma so much about politics, although that was complicated too. But I would say more emotionally. Uh, I will put in this anecdote. Sharon knows this person. She is or may be my sister. Um, I was I decided to tell my sister after a few years of Laura and me carrying on that there was somebody in my life. And so I called my sister in Kansas City and I said, well, there's somebody and new. And she goes, oh, great. Oh, that's good. You're connected with somebody. And I said, well, yeah, well, this is kind of serious because she's in prison. And my sister said, well, what did she do? Murder somebody? And I said, no, she is in prison for because she was convicted of bombing the Capitol. And my sister said, oh, oh, that is bad. So it's like murder. So uh, anyway, it was like you people were afraid of what they were convicted of. I mean, let's face it, bombings are scary and they're complicated, and it's one of the things we argued about, you know. But yeah, it was a very complex situation in terms of stigma. Uh, and I may be making it more complicated than it needs to be, but uh, there you go.
Perfect. Sharon, yours would have been a little different because he's your father. So for you, I guess the question would be, did the community, the people you knew, your neighbors, your other family, your friends, did you ever face any stigma from them for who your father was and for like loving him and stuff like that?
I didn't face any real stigma. I had some people who questioned why such the commitment, you know, and my answer to that would always be, I have, a great deal of respect for my mother and father. So my father happened to be in a precarious situation that came about as a result of his struggle, you know, um, for liberation for our people. So when you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, you know, I don't I think my commitment will always be there for my parents. And I can echo kind of what Susie is saying. Obama is a big thing. What my father was accused of is a big thing. It's not like people really get it if they're not conscious, you know. And so you have to enlighten people, and part of, being in my circle is, getting that enlightenment. And then if you're really real a friend, then you get it, so I don't think there's any real stigma that comes with that. But again, Eric, I'm sure under behind my back, people were talking, I'm sure of that. um but I had, a cousin who would joke all the time on my mother's side, y'all on the prison tour this weekend, so there were little jokes like that, and comments about my dad and his relationship with my mother and the support I had for him, knowing, that interaction. But otherwise, I don't think I faced any real stigma that I
So
know about.
just a little follow-up question briefly. Like when you were in, like, let's say high school, if you start arguing with someone, did that ever happen where they're like, your fucking dad's in jail or any shit like that? Or was it?
No, I know my
That's
brother
good.
tells this story when he escaped. They was like, have your father escape again so we can get out of
Yes.
school. So, no, it wasn't, for me anyway, it wasn't that kind of issue of bullying or the kind of thing that we see now. Yeah, I didn't face that. I don't know what my brother faced or my sister as well, but no, I didn't find that to be prevalent during my school years. More the escapes were more like inciting and they got us out of school. So it was more from that perspective from our friends. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Rochelle, honey, you met me 2 months into my sentence. And you were a part of that community. Did you feel or face any stigma or blowback or anything like that when we started getting close?
From the outside world, no, because we had a certain type of privilege because like he was arrested and he wasn't successful. So like one of the things is there wasn't damage that like we had to necessarily worry about. We didn't have to worry about that. And we didn't have like I think the hardest thing in prison we were absolved from, and that was like the guilt innocence like conundrum. Like everything they do to socialize them is to teach them about like why you are the problem, you are the one. And then like out here when we're suffering because of them, like the whole world's like gonna kind of remind you like what it is, and so everybody's meant to like drive you all apart. And we share politics and ideologies, and so like it wasn't, the rest of the world was starting to understand also because Trump was president and people were starting to be like, like there might be a situation in which like it's not wrong to like assault an officer. People are starting to have these conversations at the dinner table with like their dads and stuff like that because there's a big awakening like in the nation. And so we were absolved from all of that. I would say the one place where I did get and like have issues was probably like there was like some community stuff because like your work, like separate your work as an activist, your work as whatever, like becomes like the most palatable kind of support for people, which is like the love. Like they can understand why people do desperate things or like do it because of love. And that for the same reason like it was minimized a lot, like any of the work that would be happening, anything like that. There was like a lot of community property that we were, basically. Like they would have meetings about, like, at times like he'd write something and people would want to edit it and people would want to do that and consensus on him doing this and consensus on him doing that. And in the beginning, like we didn't have a whole bunch of like community space and stuff, so like we were charity projects at time to like people who were helping, and like there would always be like ties with it. And so it would either be like you are not working, you're just a wife or a girlfriend, or it would be um it wouldn't be understood, and it wouldn't be understood about how it doesn't go away either, because like I was in these communities prior to all of it. Like I know it, when you embark down that journey, like there's never a moment where it isn't happening, like, ever again. And I think that people who know you like on the outside, like they don't see that balance shift, and they don't see like the heavy things that just get put on top of that, and how like there's no break from the hell. If it's hell, then like everything.
Your thing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ronnie. I love you so much. So Sharon, I'm gonna start with you this question. And once again, like everyone's gonna have a different perspective, and I think that's so important. Were there ever times when it felt less hopeful? Were there times when it was like, God damn it, this is too hard? Or maybe not too hard, but it just hit harder than other times. Times when it was just almost too tough. Did you ever have any experiences like that?
Yes, I think there's always times when you feel, powerless. You feel like what you're doing may be in vain. You're always on that constant roller coaster, of knowing it's the right thing to do, but there's those, hills and valleys and highs and lows that you go through, particularly when, you're not able to intervene in your loved one's health care. You know, I think that was probably the most powerless. Even when he was shipped like to a hospital, you wouldn't even know. You would get a call from someone at the prison letting you know. I remember one time we got a call from Chucky Africa who told Mike Africa, tell the Shoatz kids that their father has been shipped out of here and we don't know what's going on. So, we were able to jump right on it. But if you don't get those calls, you're powerless to even help in a situation. Your loved one could be dying. You don't even know what's going on. They don't tell you where. And the key thing is it's a security risk, So under that guise, they can do whatever they want, And so having that limited access, I think, was the times when I felt the most powerless, Times when he was struggling when he first got the green to adjust to that new way of living um was also difficult. And I think in the end with him catching COVID and the prison lockdown and they were just doing what they wanted, you know and so yeah, those were times when I felt powerless. Other times I always felt empowered because I think of the support groups around us, the orgs, and the various people that I know, like Susie and Laura, and, seeing those, people who were really in the struggle, those 21st century, 20th century Panthers up in, walking the streets of Harlem and sharing their stories. So, yeah, although you feel powerless, you also feel encouraged by the organizations and the camaraderie and the solidarity.
Thank you. Um, quick follow-up. I hope this isn't a shitty question. Did you ever expect him to get out?
No, I didn't think he would get out, but I was always hopeful that he would get out. But you know, the 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 multiple escapes, his jacket, was the reason why I didn't think he would get out.
Yeah.
The jacket had a lot on it. It was,
It was full. It was a
right.
full jacket.
And when you look at it, and after, speaking with his legal team, and they were saying that every county that he ran through during the escape could bring charges against him. And I'm like, really? Wow. So it was a lot on his jacket. And so that was the thing that kept me thinking, no, they're not gonna approve it. And then, the politics,
Yeah.
I mean, the politics is heavy, and it's a politics that they wanted to crush, under COINTELPRO, under all of those apparatus that keep, people who struggle for liberation down so that they don't create the next Messiah, as the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover would say. So, yeah, that's why.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Susie.
Yeah, I mean, I am so relating to everything you just said, Sharon, and I want to just add that I am so ah, here come the waterworks. So moved by what you and Teresa and Russell w- hung on to and went through all those years to have a parent in prison most of your life and to hang in there. And he was actually able to live the last, what, couple of months out
Yes.
before he passed. So, I mean, and it's great, but it's also kind of wrong to be so grateful for such a small thing, you know. So anyway, and but in terms of health, that is one of the things that was really hard. Laura had, well, at one point when she was in California and I was in New York, I knew she was in bad health and uh, they might do an operation for a laparoscopic cyst or something, and but I didn't know when that was going to be. And but we were talking kind of regularly on the phone, and then suddenly she didn't call, and I thought, okay, she said she would. Where is she? So I called other people in the Bay Area who would know where she was, and they didn't know either, and they really didn't understand. None of them, especially like lawyers and people who knew the system better than I did, nobody could understand like what was going on. And then finally, a couple of 3 days later, she finally got to a phone and said, "Yeah, they took me away to a hospital where I had this operation." And I was at that point such an emotional mess that I didn't know what had happened. And anyway, it was just a very hard time because here Laura was going through just enormous physical pain and uncertainty, and me going through feeling selfish for going through all this emotional stuff. So, yeah, I think part of why it was so hard for me, I don't know anybody else, but for me, I felt bad because I had a whole lot of feelings that just didn't fit into the political picture. It was like, free Leonard Peltier, free Laura Whitehorn, free Mumia, free Maroon. But what about me? I'm really, I don't know what the fuck I'm doing here. Well, somebody please look at me, and yet Laura was doing the best she can. So, I just largely that was the system, but it also worked to create in me kind of a kind of a self-hating mentality, which is my problem. But yeah, that was partly why it was so hard.
Did Clinton pardoned or commuted Laura, correct? or did they get out?
No, she maxed out,
Oh, okay,
basically.
okay. I wasn't sure if she was a part of that group.
No. Linda and Susan and
Okay.
the Puerto Ricans were differently pardoned by Clinton. Yeah.
I think that's really valid what you were saying about how there's ways that we're supposed to feel, or like supporters are supposed to feel, but there's also the internal feelings. And that
Yeah.
guilt, I think, is very real. And I wish I could take it away. Rochelle, my love, was there ever times when you felt just the most hopeless, or like this hurts too much? And what were those times like for you?
There were so many iterations of those times, I would definitely say, because like we had like a lot of extreme bad in different ways. Like when he was attacked in Florence, it was pretty desperate, and that was like the worst because Inglewood first, they sent him out of Inglewood saying he had like assaulted an officer by like drawing a cartoon. They just like show up to visit him, he's not there. The guy's sitting there who we had like problems with, like laughing and like walking off. And so I'm like, holy shit, like I didn't think this was going to happen. And it started the train of possibilities that would happen to us from like that point out. But like when he was attacked in Florence, it happened the day I was going home from like surgery for my cancer, like my thyroid cancer. I woke up and it was crazy because I had an email also from Section 8 awarding us like a house for the first time. And then he goes home and I get a call from another, like a wife there saying that like that Eric had attacked a lieutenant, that like something had happened and Eric had attacked a lieutenant, and then everybody locked down and they didn't know what was happening. I had like just had thyroid cancer surgery, and so like I was having fevers, and my throat had just been cut open, and so like the devastation and the unknown, and like we didn't know how we could do it in the beginning. We didn't know how we would ever do like a 30-day phone ban. We were like, that's unmeasurable. Like couldn't imagine not talking to each other. And then they would do something else and it would get there. And so that was really hopeless. Like we didn't have a lot of resources. Like there wasn't a guidebook for this. Like it was so hard. And like at the time, it made it especially hard because like the people who were involved in building his case were these BOP attorneys, but they were also the US attorneys in Colorado. Like you could have both jobs at once. So you could do the BOP's best interest and then also like the US attorney's office. So it's like a funnel through like with charges. And so like that was pretty terrible. I guess I'll just go in order, like too, because he got back to Inglewood and like he wasn't supposed to be back at that prison ever because there was a protection order against one of the guards, like an internal protection order, like that they had said that he assaulted them. And so like they're not supposed to be together. And so I assumed surely they're sending him anywhere else but Inglewood. And I remember we visited in Grady County and it was like we were scared. We didn't know what was happening. And like there was still an openness between us. And then when he got there and they got to him, like the trauma kicked in because like he didn't understand his trauma at the time either. And so he was they would agitate and I wouldn't get very much time with him, and I'd be like trying to like calm down, come back, like we got this. And I would spend all my days writing letters to try to get him like the right words because like I knew what was happening. Like I knew the pattern that like I was losing him. He wouldn't understand like when I'd be like we're fighting this case and we got to do this, and he would believe that like his resistance in prison was what was going to bring him home to us. Like that, it was just a disconnect between trauma and reality. It was like if I'm going to go hard on here and like we're going to barricade in the units and like we're going to like do this how because like I need to get to you because like we my cancer stuff was popping back up again and like health stuff. And it was like, I need to get to you. And like, I knew that wasn't him. Like, I knew that he was hurting and lost. And I had to like find a way to like give him hope. And so, like, I managed to get through to him right before he was attacked. And that was a hard time. I got a phone call, like, they had taken him into the shower as he was handcuffed. And the officer who had been attacking him and like harassing us, like, had broken his head open while he was handcuffed. And like at that point, like, I didn't know if they were going to kill him or not. So like that was a hard time. But like I would say we went through a really dark time when he first got to the ADX, because like in the months prior, like we had been, I don't know how long we were fighting for like placement in Colorado with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Like we were turning us down and stuff. And I had in the back of my head, I had known some really fucked up shit happened when they visited my house, like CPS once. And like I didn't want to look for what the report was. Like I didn't want to read it. Like, and the CPS worker, like at one point in it, I was like, I know I probably sound paranoid, but like, she's like, you're not crazy. She's like, this is how you look the report up. And I did not want to know what was in that report, but I filled the paperwork out to get it. And it was like, he was in ADX, and it turned out that, a week after J6, when they gave him renewed communication restrictions, they called Child Protection Services, and they provided like sorry.
Okay.
So when for COVID, there was no like we didn't like when the first like when the visits shut down, like we had in-person visits, like we were allowed to visit. We didn't have phone because he went on a hunger strike in Leavenworth, and they said that he got a public safety factor for that. So they said that because we put something online, and they said it was like threatening to stalk and harass like UOP employees. And so they took our phone, and nobody told us they couldn't take our phone. So we didn't know. And so COVID hit, and they gave everybody else the ability to have visits over the phone. But we didn't get those, and we didn't have any method of communication. And so they were throwing away our letters, like just rejecting them back and forth, like 3 months. Like I have 50 in an envelope, and those are the only 50 I got back, like after all of that. I'm almost done, baby. But what they did do was selectively take any moment I felt sad or hard or anything that showed my mental health or like devastation as a parent or anything like that. And they reported us for having an injurious environment because of our politics. And like they sent photos of my body in the report that I had sent to him. And like it says like, and then Rochelle talks about capitalism, and it's like all of this stuff. And so like it didn't matter the law. So like that was probably the hardest, because I knew whatever they could do to us now, we knew that the law wasn't going to stop them. And so like from that point out, there was no like the realm of reality of like their ability to impact our life and all of that, like that I think was like the worst, because we can think up things so much bigger than they can do.
Susie, we also feel guilt, immense guilt. Think about that shit every day. Just mindless resistance because you think it's the right thing to do. It's hard. So we got a little bit of time left. I really want to know before anything gets closed, what was it like when they got released? What did the release feel like? What was the situation like? What did you feel? And so, Susie, we'll start with you.
Okay. Oh gosh. Okay.
Okay.
Ah, yeah. Wow. Huh. Well, I was never quite sure when or sometimes if Laura was going to get out. And then about a year or two before she actually did, they gave her a release date. So that was August 6th, 1999. And there was a chance she would get a halfway house, but that didn't happen. I was upset about that, but I thought, well, that's only 6 months. You know. Uh, so she got out, she walked out on a Friday morning, and I was kind of a mix of a million different emotions. I was relieved and happy, but yet we weren't really sure about how our relationship was going to work out. Um, there was a huge women's community in the Bay Area, and most of them were there too. So it was kind of uh, confusing and chaotic time. We went off to like two or three different parties that same day. Um, and then the next day, I think we stayed at the house of one of Laura's lawyers, Marilyn Kalman. And Laura got up early to go visit Yuri Kochiyama, and then we took the plane back to New York after that. Uh, and then it was great, but the next 2 or 3 years were challenging. We didn't live together at first, which I think was a really good idea. Um, and then after about a year and a half, we moved in, and we've continued the political arguments, but I think it's been okay. I guess my point is that it wasn't the epiphany, the salvation, the breakthrough that I think people would want it to be, that I would have wanted it to be. Things are just so complicated. And Laura had to learn to live in a whole nother way. She'd been used to living it just psychologically so differently than I was used to living. And just crossing the street with her, early on, she would walk so slowly. It was like, and it was just the assault of reality. So yeah, it was everything.
But it was everything. Who is Yori? Is that who I think it is?
Yuri Kochiyama.
Who,
Yuri Kochiyama. She was. There was just a program for her and Malcolm X at the Schomburg a couple of days ago. She was. Yeah, Sharon knew her as well. And let me just say this, and then Sharon, you could fill it in. Fury was great. She was loved by thousands of people. She was a radical. She, as a young kid, had spent some time in a concentration camp being Japanese during World War II. And that radicalized her. And I want to say it was a really good program, but in terms of the theme of this entire discussion, I was struck that nobody mentioned her husband, Bill Quiet Hochiyama, who was such a kind and gentle person and always on the scene, and yet was completely forgotten in this context where people were talking about Yuri's friendship with Malcolm X, because she was there at the time he was shot and they were very close. I guess you didn't know this from your
this is why we ask the questions, so we can grow. So we
yeah.
can grow.
Yeah, and Sharon, you want to add something
Yeah, I
about?
just want to thank you for the link because Yuri was a special person. I didn't know her husband like that, but I know I have a treasured memory of Yuri, particularly when she came to Philly. for one of the Mumia trials, and it was during the Judge Sabo time, and they weren't letting many of the supporters in the courtroom. It was basically filled with the FOP. And so Yuri comes out and they said, "Well, Yuri, who do you want to have your seat?" And she said, "Russell and Sharon Shoatz." So my brother and I looked at each other and we were shocked. And she said, "Well, wait a minute. Your father's here. Mumi is here, correct? This is Philadelphia. You should definitely be in there." And when we go in there, it's the first time. I had always protested on the outside for Mumia, but never had a chance to get inside the actual courtroom. And it was just stunning, the FOP in full force, and this little area set aside for the supporters of Mumia. So yeah, Yuri was very special, and Yuri was on a walker at that time. She had came to Philadelphia. She came out the courtroom and with her walker. She was just, a spirit, strong woman, and as they talked about in the event, who connected people together all the time. So she was just wonderful. Yeah, and
I just found a website for her that I put in the chat. So
Thank you for that. Thank you, both of you, for your recollections. I'm gonna jump to Rochelle for this last little question, and then we'll close out with you, Sharon. Honey, what was it like the day I was released? What was it like for you inside, like internally or mentally, and then like what was the moment like for you?
I mean, we had to fight over the last year to get him released. So like it didn't seem like it was going to happen. We didn't know if he was going to get hit with another case like out the way on the way out the door. Like we lived the whole time with the reality that like maybe there's another one. Like because they definitely tried, and maybe there was going to be another one. And then like we had all sorts of terrible stuff with like halfway house, and before we came to like an amazing understanding with probation, like there was like some difficulties there, because not everybody in probation wanted him here, and so there were some people fighting to allow him to come to Colorado, but then there were some people who didn't feel safe with that, and so it was all like a fight. And so that was no different. Like it's 2 hours away, so we went and stayed overnight in the hotel, and got up in the morning and got there, and like you're supposed to come onto the compound to pick them up, and then suddenly like we were not on the compound, and like that wasn't abnormal. Like there were times when it was just suddenly we're not allowed or anything like that, but like for a release, none of the guards at the front had ever seen a release where they don't release at the prison, because the compound has 4 different prisons on it. And I think like they didn't know how they were going to get him down to the gate, because like they weren't going to let me on. And so they had us go sit in the van like on the side of the road, and it was terrible, like because I had driven down before and found horrible things, and so like the reality of like what does this mean, like is he getting out, like we didn't know. And so then he came down. I ran and gave him a hug. The whole day was like there were all these things that I needed to do, all these demands, like all of these, like if you don't do these things, he can't get here. I got sick. I was vomiting the whole night before. I was afraid I wouldn't be able to stop vomiting, like, and I wouldn't be able to get him out. Like, I was afraid of all of these things. We got to get back to Denver. We got to get to Halfway House. Like, we have to get to Target. We had like a lot of people in the van, and somebody had the heat like blasting. And so, like, my face was red and was like overwhelmed and overstimulated. And then, like, got to the Halfway House and then, like, had to let go of him again. And then like the people at the halfway house, like in the beginning, had to decide if like we were beefing or not. It was quite a little bit of a shit show with halfway house, and that like definitely all of those things like keep you closer from each other. Like they so it was to cut down all the things that like kept us apart like over like the next year or so. Like we're both healing from trauma, like we both experienced different sides of that trauma. And like me, my need to protect him so heavily, especially because we were involved in a case against like the U.S. attorney for like a very up close and personal case, like against the U.S. attorney for 4 or 5 years. And so like, and then having to protect him against the prison and all of that. And so now when he's coming home and he's going through his trauma, like it's my job to then go step in and like fix like historically, like whenever there's a problem. And so like I would be really sensitive to his pain and he would be really sensitive to my pain, and it was like a lot of passing it back and forth. It Our whole lives were disrupted in the beginning because of Halfway House, because I would drive an hour to pick him up, to drive 30 minutes to work. I'd sit like on the floor next to his desk at work, like an emotional support dog. And like whenever he would get upset or something, I would be able to give him love. And I would like come in and out, and then like we'd spend all day out of the house, and then I'd drive him back there, and then drive like another hour south, and do that. And it was all about like, how do I help? Like, because I know him so well, like we're so close, I know the things that he needs. And so you talked about codependent earlier. You can't have a loving relationship in prison without codependency, like because we need each other. Like we need each other so desperately and in a very intimate way. So like if you can transition that on the outside, like you have something that is um because of the pain you've been through, because of that, you have something that just can be so beautiful and easy because of how hard it is like prior to that. But like you gotta put those walls down first. Like you gotta both put your walls down. Like you gotta both get adjusted. And that's like aside from whatever trauma you picked up like during that time, both of you. But things are doing pretty well right now. I prefer to think about right now than release day. Like Eric and I talked about what a horrible day that was. Like it was so much pressure for both of us. It was so scary.
Thank you, honey. It's kind of like New Year's Day, where like everyone expects the party to be super fun and gets overhyped, and then you finally do it, and it doesn't live up because you have all these imaginary like preconceptions of how it's supposed to be. Kind of like the hug
Yeah,
you're talking about,
right.
where like it has to be the best thing on earth. And, like, there's hurt involved. Like there's just so much conflicting emotions. Sharon, if you could, man, I might be able to ask just a quick last question, but I want to hear what it was like when Maroon was released, what you went through emotionally, physically, just what that whole day was like for you.
Yeah, it was definitely different from anything I imagined. And like you said, it's a lot of conflicting emotions going on. It was both joyous and emotional relief. But of course, it was bittersweet because my father was frail. He was not in the condition of a man that could get up and, move around. But the fact was that he was home. He was around comrades, family, friends, supporters. He didn't have to die in an institution. And so from that perspective, it was glorious, it was wonderful. Of course, again, it was not the, sparks I thought it was going to be. And I remember doing a little freedom dance. I was like, freedom, and I remember him smiling. And I felt like this huge weight just lift off of me because I felt free too, after all of these years. So for me, although it was bittersweet, it was just an emotional, physical, joyous time that lifted so much weight off of me, and it allowed me to also gain my freedom is what I felt. Like I was free too, and I just did my little freedom dance, and I was good. And so I think, despite the fact that his health had deteriorated so much in order for him to get home, and for him to, have to go through it that way, I think everything happens for a reason. The fact is, he came home. We were grateful. I know I was grateful. I can't speak for anybody else, but I think everyone else was grateful that he was able to come home and, to share that time with him. And half of the family didn't know him, which was the other thing. You know what I'm saying? So that in itself, and that's what I like about the book, I Am Maroon as well, because they really now get to know who he was, and they got to meet him in person to get that real effect too, because that's a little different than a book. So yeah, it was great.
Thank you so much. So I don't expect you to know this at all, but like Maroon was one of my heroes. He just like embodied like that fighting spirit, and I would write like my little essays about him all the time. In 2018, there was a thing like that was put out in all the newsletters about like write about Maroon. Like I forget what it was called, but I remember writing and just like, man, I hope this dude gets out so bad. And the day it was released, I remember just weeping because no one expected. Like he wasn't the one we expected.
No, not at all. Not at
Like
all.
knowing that like you got to see him, like you got to do that little dance and shit.
Yes. It was
I'm
good.
so happy. I'm so happy that I got to have this conversation with you three. Um, so just last question quickly before Liberty kicks us out and attacks me. Um, what is I want to close out with like with you all. If there's anything you just want to shout out, if there's any projects you're working on that you want to talk about, or anything you just want to get up your chest real quick, just this is just a brief moment for you all to express yourselves however you would like. We'll start with you, Susie.
Me? Oh God. Okay.
There we go.
Uh, okay. Well, just in terms of what I've recently done, I did an interview with a really brilliant writer named Arun Kundnani, who's writing a book about Jamil Al-Amin, formerly H. Rap Brown,
Oh,
and it should be out next year sometime. Anyway, I interviewed him, and it's in Spectre Journal online. If I had the and then just generally, I feel like all this has been great, and families and loved ones of people inside prison are the untold story. There is like for every one person inside prison, there are, if you guess, there's like five people at least. I mean, you've got millions of people with huge, deep, chaotic stories that need to be expressed. And I think there's a lot of shame and people are just not interested. But I think I hope this is a step forward to getting us to talk to each other, you know. And I guess that's about it.
thank you so much. Sharon, you're up.
So, we're definitely promoting the I Am Maroon book. Because anybody want us to come to their town, down with coming to promote the book. Um, Other than that, we've been on a tour for the book, basically on the East Coast, around everywhere in 2024. And we look forward to coming anywhere in 2025. If you're interested, the hashtag Instagram is I am Maroon, or you can contact my brother as well. But I did want to speak also about your book, Eric. I did get a chance to listen to all the stories there as well. Yes. So, um, I did the book, but I ended up getting the audio so that I could listen, and I finished it. So it was great. So I want to thank you also for your support, and getting those stories out, because a lot of those people, you fight for on their behalf, but you really didn't know what their stories were. So thank you for that.
You are welcome. And shout out Josh Davidson, who did all of the hard work.
Yeah.
Who
Can
put
I add? also that I think it's really valuable that this book combines different generations of prisoners. Not, there's the Marxist Leninist, Panther, and then there's the anarchists, younger ecologists. I think it's so valuable because they're all political, they have differences, but that's good, and I think it's really good that they're all together. So
Right. Well, thank you. I'm feeling so good right now. Also, just a side note before I go to Rochelle, I was in ADX with people that knew Jamil, that were there when he was there, and they hold that dude in the highest respect. Like there's not a
uh-huh.
single bad word to be heard about him.
Well,
So
he's just been transferred to Butner, the medical facility, you probably know, because anyway, if you read yeah.
Yeah,
So that's,
so free Jamil. Um,
yeah. And also just keep in touch with what's going on in your local area in terms of prison and prisoners, because like in New York right now, there's a prison guard strike, which is deeply affecting negatively people inside in terms of not getting food, medical care, showers, basic things like that. And Hochul has stupidly called in the National Guard to fix it. So
that's right. So Rochelle, honey, is there anything you want to sign off with? Anything you want to promote? Anything you want to talk about before we sign out?
No. Good. I said a lot of things. It was really great to do this with you. And I do have to say, like, the one thing, like, when we were going through our worst, that like you don't hope for the best, but like you hope to find the possibilities. And like one thing that always struck me is like where the possibilities could be right like on the perimeter, and knowing about your dad, and like his possibility was that his story was like fell on just the right ear and stuff. And so when we were going through like our hardest and like everything horrible was happening, like we couldn't even tell half of it like that was happening, but like it was just the hope that like maybe there's a possibility, like maybe there's a possibility like the person that's going to help walk him out of prison or walk him home to us like is paying attention, and like you don't know they're not, or that they're not going to. that
I am going to sign off now how I always do. For everyone listening, please write a prisoner. If you want to write someone in ADX, I recommend Randy Platt. If you want to write anyone else, please. And also, please support their families. Understand that this isn't a one-person show. It's not just one person locked up, as everyone here has attested. It is their families. It is their friends. It is their communities. And we need to lift each other up because no one else is going to do it. So thank you three so much. This really moved me and it was really powerful. And thank you, Liberty and Firestorm.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, such deep appreciation to all of you for sharing today.
Yeah.
Hope everybody has a great evening and thank you for being here.
I